I'd like to welcome you to this Green Christian workshop on how to understand the roadmaps to net zero. This first section is being re-recorded because we didn't get the first piece, so you'll have me looking slightly differently dressed in the rest of it as we go forward and as we go to the actual workshop. So I'm going to redo the first slides that we talked about. So first of all, let me just share with you the PowerPoint, what route to net zero. So what we've done is we have researched the key issues around four model roadmaps to net zero. It's really important to understand the big picture of climate change as it's rolling through and how the action is planned, is proposed to take it forward. We've researched those proposals, mapped that out, and what we're going to try and do now, very, very quickly, is to give you an overview, an understanding of those route maps to identify the biggest issues that arise. There are four route maps. We advertised 3 originally, but we were so excited by the fourth one, net zero by 2050, by the International Energy Authority, that we thought we would add that in as well. It's going to be a romp because there's a lot to cover, but that's how in an hour we can touch the main issues and give you an understanding. So let's move on. The first model I'd like to talk to you about is going to be the zero net carbon model. The second is Project Drawdown. Then Bill Gates' book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And finally, net zero by 2050. And I thought it'd just be useful to compare those 4 approaches. Zero Carbon Britain is UK only, the others are worldwide. The focus of the problem is slightly different. So ZCB, look at energy. Project Drawdown, look at solutions and what each solution will give. Bill Gates' book looks at the sources of climate disaster, and the International Energy Agency, surprise, surprise, looks at energy. Where does that come from? And they've got different views on technology. So the first 2 are really looking at, well, what's available, what demonstrates to work, what's well proven, whereas the second 2 are looking much more at breakthroughs. How much new technology, where can we find new ways of tackling the issues that we're facing? And the solution focus is different as well. You know, the first 2, again, are thinking about technical practicality. Bill Gates' book looks a lot at consumers and politics and production process. And the International Energy Authority thinks about politics and technical pragmatism. And lastly, they have different dates. Zero Carbon Britain 2030, I can hooray to that from a sort of an environmental perspective. Is it practical though? And the others have later dates in terms of achieving those net zero. So first of these is Zero Carbon Britain, perhaps by the Centre for Alternative Technology. Perhaps I should call it the Centre for Existing and Established Technology, because they've taken that approach in here. An excellent report, but I want to take you through the core elements of that report. First key phase to understand is that they have an energy focus. So the black bar is the total CO2 created by, on the left-hand side, created by the UK, which is 1% of the UK, of the world's carbon greenhouse gas emissions. And that is split into 3 elements in terms of how they've analyzed it. They've pulled out all the energy parts and put it into one, and that's the blue bar. Then they've looked at non-energy, things like the production of various things in manufacturing, CFC gases, etc. And then they pulled out the land use issues, which includes carbon sinks. And what they're really saying is we can fundamentally reduce the impact of energy on fossil fuels, and we can make land sinks so much more effective, reduce the energy needed in non-energy, and therefore net zero this whole thing. And they've got some phases. The first issue, of course, has to be power. And the first phase that they talk about is what they call power down, reducing the amount of energy demand in the UK by 60%. 60%, half reduction in buildings energy, nearly 80% reduction in transport and energy. Now, that reduction in transport and energy, for example, isn't all efficiency. It's about, of the 78% that's on the chart, about 33% is efficiency, and 45% is about reducing the demand for travel. So less travel miles per person by 13%, much more public transport, in reducing car travel by a quarter, reducing flying by 2/3, increasing rail freight by 200%, and massively reducing road freight using hydrogen and biofuels instead. So I think that, so they've been putting forward a detailed vision for how you could actually, in the UK, get to net zero. The second part is what they call power up. So if you've, on the left-hand side of the chart there, reduced all that oil, gas, and coal that is affected, then the question is, how on earth do you increase it? So they've taken out oil, gas, and coal, they've taken out nuclear, so there's a small amount of renewables, and then there's a massive increase required in renewables to provide that reduced level of power. And they have calculated that for the UK, wind would be 51%, biomass 19%, heat pumps 13%, solar 8%. And they've said no nuclear, no carbon capture and storage. But a key issue that comes out of that process is the balancing of energy demand through short and long-term energy storage. So in a typical week, we produce way more energy through a few days than we need, and we don't produce enough for other days. How do you sort that? Well, you can have batteries, pumped storage, heat storage, hydrogen, to short-term shifting of demand in the meantime. But there's a fundamental issue about how you manage it between, say, the summer and the winter, when there's massive energy demand. You know, all those gas stations you see going up and down with all the gas, natural gas that they store for our heating needs in the winter. How do you support that energy demand? You might have enough energy overall in the UK, but you have to be able to do the peaking, and fossil fuel is great for peaking. So the Zero Carbon Britain looks at the use of carbon neutral synthetic gases for that. Biogas and synthetic methane created from renewable energy that can be stored and used for long-term energy storage over the weeks and the months that are required. This is a key issue in managing energy requirements of the UK going forward. I'm not going to spend ages on the non-energy emissions. This is more information and understanding of the overview. But to understand that iron, steel, cement, and greenhouse gases, super GHGs, you know, the kind of things that are in our refrigerants, etc., are a major issue that need to be and can be managed down. And they give a game plan for how that can happen. And for waste, similarly, emissions from waste mainly come from landfill, methane that's produced, and from waste incineration and wastewater processing. So there's a game plan that they provide to help to work through that 10% of the UK greenhouse gas emissions. And the last 10% is in terms of how land is used. And I love this diagram because what it shows at the top is each of the squares represents 1 million hectares of the UK's land and how it is used. And they envisage a repurposing of how land is used in the UK. And what you can see is quite different is the pink and yellow, which is how what is used for livestock fundamentally re-engineers down the bottom to a much smaller piece. Not as much meat is needed to be eaten. They're not saying no meat, they're saying we can reduce how much we use. We can have more plant-based diets. We can repurpose land so we have enough to eat, more than enough to eat, but instead we can use a whole bunch of land for carbon capture. Unharvested forest, harvested forest, restored peatlands to start sucking carbon out of the air and make our country much more sustainable. Similarly, a repurposing for the use of fuel and energy in that little box at the bottom there. So short rotation forestry, short rotation crops to allow that to be used for energy. And so there's a sort of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, growing those crops, using them then when the carbon gets put back in, but then recycling that carbon so you're using it in a very, very efficient and effective way. So that is the overview of the first part of those models, and we've enjoyed some good Q&A through that. And now we're going to carry on with the rest of the presentation.
I was in Orkney last week, and as well as having wind turbines everywhere and doing some very exciting innovations on tidal power, electrolytic hydrogen and zero carbon shipping, they farm cattle and sheep. This is because the land is good, but the climate and the short growing season are such that the few trees there that can grow only very slowly, and arable crops don't do very well, but grass grows well, and all the farms graze cattle and sheep. Now, you might make this part of the 25% exception, but then you also have to think about sheep farmers all over Wales, the Lake District, often on marginal land, and the Pennines, the Yorkshire Dales, and the Peak District.
Andrew,
yes?
Andrew, forgive me, I'm going to interrupt you for a second,
yeah.
because we want to bring in one or two other voices. I think press just one question this time. We've still got 3 more scenarios, 3 more roadmaps to go through. So I'm going to thank you for your response to Staffan there. And
so just very quickly to finish, my biggest bugbear about zero carbon is that it's strong on what needs to be done, but actually doesn't give many clues about how it may be achieved in such a short period of time. So that's
yeah, not enough detail there, not explanation of how they would get there. Okay, I'll take one comment or question from the participants when we go on to the next roadmap. Anybody desperate to ask a question? Sandra Dustin, you've got the floor.
This is just a quick one, really, but you said that the reductions in buildings and transport were split in some way between demand and efficiency. So, and it was a huge reduction in energy demand, and I'm not quite clear how that happens. Do they spell out how it happens that you get a reduction in demand?
Staffan?
Yes, they do. I mean, if you work through the report, and you'll see the detail that I'll send you, but they're talking about a reduced 13% reduction in travel miles per person, doubling public transport, mostly electric, quarter reduction in car travel, 2/3 reduction in flying, 200% increase in rail freight, and a 30% reduction in road freight, and moving to hydrogen and biofuels. So they've got they've done a good sort of scenario that says actually this is plausible.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you, Staffan. Roadmap 2, please, Staffan.
Right. Thank you so much for driving us to keep on track, because we could chat on this forever. Right, so let's now go to roadmap 2. Here we go. So the next one is the Drawdown review. What an excellent piece of work done by an independent consultancy that started, I think it was an American newspaper. It's a non-profit to help assess climate solutions, and it's got tremendous detail, and you'll find it. You've got the links on the PowerPoint that you'll see here. So let me just go through and take you to that. What do they say? Well, they say, look, there are 6 main sources of greenhouse gases on the left-hand side, and there are two main sinks. Sorry. And what's happening at the moment is, if you add up all the sources, and you can see this in the little the chart, 25% electricity production, 24% food. And then you work at the sinks, plants on land and oceans, add all that together, reduce it together. Currently, there is a 59% that remains in the atmosphere, and that is the problem. And the whole process of drawdown is saying, at what point do we start drawing down the amount of CO2 going in and taking it out? Not just reducing, but actually we start to reduce the amount of CO2, and that's the core focus of Project Drawdown. And you can see that here. Two scenarios they have. Scenario one is to get, the first one is the baseline. You see how the baseline is going up, 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 up. That's where we're heading now in terms of CO2, total of CO2 equivalent concentration in the atmosphere. Scenario one says gets to -2 warming and gets a drawdown in the mid-2060s. Scenario two is gets to a 1.5 degree warming, and that happens in 2045. And what we've done is look at that second scenario to say, what are they saying needs to happen? So scenario two, 1.5 aggregate measures. If you look at it, first of all, at the very high level, the relative importance of the various measures to get a 1.5. What you get, I always like to see this aggregated, is that measures around electricity, mostly renewable electricity, is at the top of the shop. Land sinks is huge, 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 huge. Food agriculture with land sinks together is another massive one. So you almost sort of 70% is in three key areas. And the others, and this is a surprise for me, things like transportation, which has always been a big issue for me, what car do I drive and do I fly and whatever. Yes, that's important and has to be part of the solution, but you've got to get the three biggies right. Let's make sure in all our lobbying, in all our work, that we are really looking at those three. So what I did then was I said, let's look at all the various measures, and they got all the measures that they do, and I did a Pareto. I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with that. As you said, how many measures add up to 80% of the 1,500 billion gigatons of CO2 equivalent? That's at the bottom. And I've listed them out here to give us a chance to understand the key ones, the most significant ones. And then I've categorized them against the sectors. So first of all, electricity was the main one. What does that mean? What is it really saying? Well, yes, wind turbines, photovoltaics, distributed photovoltaics, concentrated solar power, massive opportunities. That's where most of that 26% on the previous slide came from, in the yellow. The second key area, land sinks. What are they talking about? Restoring tropical forests, silvopasture, tree plantations, perennial staple crops, temperate rainforest restorations, grazing, tree intercropping, all those key issues about how we really benefit by looking after the land that sustains us and that we live on. The next one is food. And you see that actually reduced food waste, and there's a big waste issue sitting in there, and those plant-rich diets to changing the balance are right at the top of the shop. And not quickly thereafter, you come to peatland protection and regenerative annual cropping. These, again, are all the ones that were in the top, 80% issues. Which then takes you to, again, we're back again to refrigerants. All these fridges and air conditioning systems and all. This is a key issue, the leaking of refrigerants out into the atmosphere, and the fact that we're still using old-fashioned ones when we can find alternative and new ones. And I love this one. Talk about justice, health and education. Where you globally educate women with equality, where you educate people in terms of how to manage their land, how to do population growth issues, we can make a massive difference. And they have calculated these three to really understand what the sort of the global saving would be. The last one I picked out here I love is because improved clean cook stoves. And I saw that Jeff and Sandra Stratford are here, and I know you've been involved with climate stewards. Terrible, the offsetters. Well, what they do is they go into things like African families, and they will give them a proper recyclable cook stove to help them live on. And that each one saves 6 tons of CO2. So it's a very exciting global sort of work through that needs to happen. So that's the big picture. And at that point, I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll open it up, Andrew and all.
Just a couple of minutes. Andrew, do you want to come in with just one point?
Well, I like that. It's not so much this is what you have to do, it's more this is what you could do if you wanted to keep global temperature increases to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. I think what I would say is for this, the carbon sinks are generally in what we would recognize, or quite a lot of them, as offsets. So you buy sort of offsets elsewhere in the world to compensate for the emissions that you can't really do anything about. And although it looks overseas for carbon sinks, such as the education, bamboo, reinstating tropical forests, are all excellent things. It doesn't take into account the overseas emissions that are associated with the steel and the concrete and the consumer goods and the food that we import. So in one sense, it's sort of international, what we can do to find carbon sinks, but actually it only gives us part of the story.
Thank you. Okay, Andrew, thank you. Time for one question or comment from somebody else here. Put your hand up, a blue hand, or wave in the air. Anybody want to come in? Either a question or a comment? Leslie, unmute yourself, Leslie, and come in.
I saw on a recent programme, I think it might have been Country File, about the importance of seagrass. And yet I haven't seen any reference in any of these things. There was a brief reference to oceans, but does anybody know how that would figure in such a scheme as this?
Yes, and it's all in the Drawdown report. I mean, actually, the amount of extra carbon sink opportunity that comes out of oceans, they think is relatively small. The numbers in there, I could dig it out in the report, but and some of the, exactly why. I mean, I guess it's hard to the ocean's huge, but a lot of it's very deep. So all I can do is come back and say, what are they saying, and that is what they're saying.
But if some of you watch the Radio 4's excellent series, 39 Ways to Save the Planet, there are actually loads of ideas, many of them in Project Drawdown or along similar lines, that show how the carbon sinks can be created and optimized.
Yeah, that indeed they do, Andrew. Thank you for bringing that in. Right, we go on now then to Bill Gates. Over to you, Staffan, for roadmap number 3.
Yes, I wish it was Bill Gates talking to you. I'm sure there'll be a lot more people on the screen today. Yes, so Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. And I was very excited about this and really enjoyed reading the book. I have to say that once I had read the book and compared it to the others, I felt, well, okay, yeah, you've described the problem, but have you really given, it's not quite the promise on the cover of, how to avoid a climate disaster. It's sort of, here are some of the potentials, but it's a great book and you'll enjoy it if you read it, even though, like me, you probably won't agree with everything that you see. So the first one is, he's got back to an annualized gigatons. So whereas they had, the last people had 1,500 of gigatons needs to be saved over 30 years, this one he's saying, well, 51 gigatons is what has got to be reduced for the world. And remember, we talked about the UK was 500 or 0.5 gigatons. That's our 1%. We're 1% of the 51. What I find helpful about the analysis is the looking at the whole global piece and saying, where does it sit? And he doesn't like the cat of Zero Carbon Britain, take it all into power. He actually distributes it and say, well, what are the root things going on around here? So first of all, he talks about making things, 31%, then electricity, growing things, transportation, and temperature. So making things, the biggest aspects of making things is cement and steel. Cement and steel, the absolute heart of any civil engineer's passions and delivery, is where an enormous amount of energy and CO2 is made, not just in making it, but also in the production process as well. And what's the answer? Well, electrify everything you can, reduce waste, and create some. But at the same time, he raises, remember that we've got our infrastructure. There's a whole bunch of people out there who are desperate to have a civilization and an industry and a living as well. We've got it. We've got roads, we've got travel, with transport, rails, everything else. But India, Borneo, they want it as well. How do we do that? There's got to be a real leveling up, is his argument. Electricity, absolutely on the button, getting enough renewable energy to replace fossil fuels. The intermittency of renewables, big issue. And we can talk about electrolysis and carbon spreading, etc. The other thing is wind and solar power aren't in all the places we need them. How do you move them around and transmit them? He's a big carbon capture fan, both carbon capture and storage, putting it underground, and direct air capture, developing technology that means you can basically suck carbon out of the air. Incredibly expensive at the moment, but he says keep working at it and we can do it. The third area is growing things. So ruminants is the big naughty word. So cows, camels, sheep, all those kind of animals that ruminate and they create methane, which, as you know, is 40 times more carbon intensive than anything else. And there are many ways that you can sort that. You can have better breeds, you can have better management and education to really help to move that forward. And he goes through a whole bunch of things that affect the growing thing. The amount of manure is created is a big no-no. Fertilizers create a lot of, in the process of issues, and relearning to be done in terms of how we handle growing things. Behavior change and education being absolutely at the top of the shop. So transportation, well, we've reasonably well developed in some of this, but the whole electrification story sits there. And I know there are concerns around the place about, well, what about batteries and whatever, but fundamentally, some people worry a lot about extracting materials out of the ground to make batteries. I worry a lot about extracting oil and gas and vastly greater quantities and putting that poison in the atmosphere. We still have to do it justly. Now, key issue that comes up again and again and again is the alternative energy intensive biofuels or clean electrofuels, so that you can have a plane going, that you can get a ship from A to B and a train and a heavy goods vehicle. These are areas which won't be solved by batteries, and different incentives and investments are required. And then lastly, temperature regulation. That is, well, heating your home and cooling your home, depending on where you live. There are solutions developing in this area. Now, that's basically a real quick overview of Bill's book. Many of you will read it. His big thing is understanding and knowing what will the consumer be able to put up with, and what can actually practically be delivered, and what he calls the price premium. What is the extra you have to pay to have a green solution? So perhaps a little American from that side. So that's me on that. That's number 3. Is that number 3? Yeah.
That's number 3. Yes, Staffan. Now, I'm going to ask Staffan to go straight on to number 4, And if you've got a question on Bill Gates' book, would you like to put it in the chat so we can see it there, and hopefully we'll pick up on that after we've heard roadmap number 4. So International Energy Agency. Over to you again, Staffan.
Will do. Okay, let's keep going on that. I can see why your vice chairman, Barbara, you do a great job of steering us through. So International Energy Agency. So Andrew and I thought that we should add this because there's some super work done in here. And what they've done is they've looked at the energy equation. So that's about 70 to 80% of the whole CO2 footprint piece. That's what they're really interested in. And really they're saying, look, there are some key indicators of things that we really need to move up, which I've just put 2 or 3 of them in here that make sense. So first of all, capacity. There is a need to quadruple the amount of solar and wind that is used from 2020 in the next 10 years. And there's more thereafter. That's just the next 10 years. And they've said, look, in the next 10 years, you can halve the carbon output. And these are the key measures, part of the key measures you've got to see. Electric car sales have to go up by 18 times. And we have to become vastly less energy intensive, more efficient at how we use energy within our industry. And they call it net zero by 2050 hinges on an unprecedented clean technology push to 2030. And it's narrow. We'll get electricity is getting the edge because it's getting cheaper and ever more. And we have all the technologies fundamentally to achieve 2030. And that's the story here. So 2030, if you look at how do you do it? Well, they've got relatively minimal behavior changes, quite different from the cat. But technologies in the market at the top are giving the vast slice of the improvement needed for that area, some under development, but to get the other half, a whole bunch of new technologies they're saying is needed. Further rapid development of available technologies, widespread use of things that are not on the market yet. Biggest innovation opportunities concern that you need better advanced batteries, hydrogen electrolyzers, that's that biofuel kind of, not biofuel, but electrolytic fuels, taking water and splitting it into hydrogen, with electricity, into clean electricity, to hydrogen and oxygen, and using that hydrogen to power what we do. They talk about direct air capture, controversial, very new strategy, sucking carbon out of the air, and storage, which is controversial for a lot of us. And also they plan in growth. They say the world is going to continue to grow, and so in this chart you'll see, the 10 years 24% reduction, and the 20 years thereafter a 51% reduction, but counters by strong measures to reduce the amount of CO2 to get to zero. Bioenergy, wind and solar, hydrogen, efficiency, behavior changes. Now, this is the last chart here, and I like this one, key milestones in the pathway to net zero, because it puts some great challenges. You might argue about the timeline, but what are the challenges? So number one, we've heard about this in the papers, no new unabated coal plants approved for development. 2025, no new sales of fossil fuel boilers. 2030, universal energy access, all new buildings zero carbon. 60% of global car sales are electric. So they've tried to really work through what is needed, first of all, to get to the 50% 2030, and then to drive the process as a route map to get us through to net zero by 2050. That's what they're putting onto the table.
Wow. That was a quick whiz tour through, Staffan. Now, questions from Andrew or others on either Bill Gates or the International Energy Agency? Then I know Staffan's got one final concluding slide for us to look at. So hands up or put in chat, whatever. Sandra again.
Yeah, well, I have given warning of this to Staffan, but because of a project I'm involved in looking at conflict minerals from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which includes cobalt for car batteries, and of course a lot of stuff we have in our gadgets. Congo remains one of the poorest countries in the world. A lot of the mining actually displaces people and actually ruins their agricultural land. Same in Chile for lithium. And there are some huge issues. I mean, yes, we don't want to dig up coal, but actually digging up anything isn't very good environmentally. And I thought that I mean, I'm encouraged that there are so many things that aren't about renewable energy and battery storage ideas, because it's the batteries at the moment. But I think that the reading I've been doing is this is a new form of colonialism, that we are extracting resources from poor countries and ruining their lives, and they're not getting the energy and they're not getting the food. But also it does point to the fact that we have to address consumption, and electric cars, no, electric vehicles, mass transit, maybe, but there is a whole lot of how you address the consumption of the West, of the wealthier nations, and I don't think we can evade it. I think this has been very interesting, and I'm encouraged, but we have to look at that side of it.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm going to ask if Staffan would like to respond, simply because we are always so limited on time. Staffan, did you want to come back on that?
Well, I think there are some great points there. I mean, there's no doubt that we are consumption obsessed, and that, as a society, the West, that is ruining us. It's breaking us, and people need to be released from that, you know. And so, you know, we look to God and we pray, and we look for that bind to be broken, because people never find happiness when they're just wanting more and more and more. So thank you for that. I think the issue on justice out there and how you do it, well, we could just switch society off. Everybody turn off your central heatings, turn off, never sell your car. We'll just live in a cave, is one thing that people sometimes say. And I think, well, I mean, some people exploited workers in how they made clothes terribly, terribly. I don't go naked because of that. I just make sure I buy from the right sources. And there are some very good sustainable sources, and we need to keep the pressure on the manufacturers to make sure that batteries, if we're using them, I have a battery electric car, that they are, you know, sourced properly and by reputable suppliers. And people like Volvo are demonstrating that, you know, that's becoming more and more important.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Staffan. Alan and then Rebecca. So Alan, would you like to come in first?
Good evening. I've read Bill Gates' book and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I took part in the Hen Wild Literary Festival and listened to Alex Sharma and Christiana Figueres. And I put a question to her about Bill Gates' green premium, and also about border taxes for countries that were non-compliant with regard to reductions in emissions. And both of them ignored that. They gave lengthy answers, very verbose, but didn't answer those points. What I'm going to move on to, though, having read the book, I found that the book is misrepresented so often as just pointing towards technological solutions. Yes, it does address that, but it does say there's a very significant role for government and for consumers and for employers and for employees, and political level, national, regional and local, and internationally. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. But with regard to the investment, I've read recently a book by a Financial Times reporter on green investment, and the huge strides that have been taken in the investment sector, financial sector, to ensure that we move towards zero carbon, because they can see the risk that poses to business if we don't. Their long-term futures are jeopardized and investments are jeopardized. And if you see the analogy of us being in a wartime situation with regard to climate change, time is not on our side. In wartime, there are huge technological advances take place very rapidly indeed to beat the enemy. Well, we know what the enemy is, and we need to invest hugely in these areas, because the other books rely on culture change. You haven't got the politicians in position who are going to bring in that political change. You know what happens to the Green Party election after election. So we haven't got time for that, however laudable it may be. And Bill Gates is in favor of cultural change where it can be brought about, and encourage politicians to encourage that. But nevertheless, I think it's very right to put a great emphasis on finance and research and development.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Staffan?
No, that's fine. That's
Okay, let's hear from Rebecca then. Good to have some more voices in. Rebecca?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. The point basically I want to make is, can we accept any sort of solution which is reliant on technology which doesn't exist when we're faced with an existential threat like climate change? Now that's my basic question. I'll elaborate with a couple of points. The first one is that I think it's John Kerry in the USA said recently that we reliant on that most of the technology for addressing climate change doesn't exist yet, and Greta Thunberg came back with a rather scathing response. She said she will be calling on Harry Potter. And another point, this was something I saw in the Financial Times technology column, but I could imagine it appearing in quite a lot of other places. It was saying that a new technology basically has to pass two hurdles. Firstly, can something be done at all? And secondly, can it be done at scale? And whereas it might be possible to say you can do something like carbon capture, it has met the first technological hurdle, and the technology for doing it at scale doesn't exist, and it might never exist. Well, you see the point. This is the case with many of these technologies which don't exist. Yes, it is technologies. If you just look at what's happened to computers and smartphones and so on over the past few years, yes, technology does move on very quickly, but we need very specific technologies to address an existential threat, and can we rely on it actually happening? So that's the point basically.
Thank you, Rebecca.
No, that's great. I'd be very interested in Andrew's perspective on that. Andrew,
would you like to come in?
I think it is needed to be grounded in reality. I think
Andrew, could you speak a little bit louder, please? We're having difficulty hearing you.
One of the good things about Bill Gates' book, and indeed the International Energy Agency modeling, is that they are grounded in reality, in the way that things are. Quite a lot of the technology, there's a huge mushrooming of technology that relates to zero carbon or net zero carbon in virtually every sector. There is work going on somewhere in the world. New technology is being developed. There are some very speculative things that might or might not come about. And what Bill Gates says is that, well, you have to try these and just accept that sometimes they're not going to work. But he's very much into working with markets, with industry, promoting innovation, promoting different ways in which we can approach the problems. But of course, underneath it all, and I think all of us would agree, how do we achieve the cultural change in society? That not all people think the same way as we do. Probably 80% of the population just isn't there at all. How do we achieve the cultural change so that people will accept the changes that are needed and help to support what is going on?
Thank you, Andrew. That is such an important point. Thank you very much for making that. We're coming now to our concluding slide, and Staffan, as you show us that, I'd like you to bear in mind Joe Crocker's question in the chat. Do you see evidence of ours or other governments paying attention to particular models? Would they pay attention to these?
Well, I mean, my take is that these are designed to get the attention of government and say to them, look, this is doable, and to help to start thinking about the route map for making it work. They're credible, and they're done by some credible organizations. The International Energy Authority, as an example. You know, Bill Gates like him or love him, and I like him. He's very credible. You know, he spoke to the global leaders just recently. You know, so and the cat probably seen as a bit hard over in some areas in the UK, but you know, it has credibility, been there a long time. So you know, keep at it. I mean, the reality is this is now much more seriously discussed, and we have to keep that pressure on in terms of what matters to us as citizens. So what I was going to do now is just give you a comparison to think about, and we're very short on time. And we're talking about behavior change. Well, you know, CAT's Zero Carbon Britain is highly focused on behavior change. The others, I wasn't clear, or there was some focus change, some focus, I think, but not as highly as the CAT's. Renewables, they all see renewables, wind and solar as absolutely top of the shop. Carbon capture and storage, well, it's an even two, no for 2 and yes for 2. Nuclear, no for 2, yes for 2. Direct air capture, no for 2, yes for 2. So there's a different kind of angle sitting in here. And obviously the worry is that people might rely on technologies that don't exist and never turn up. But Andrew's point was fantastic just now, which is that actually you got to invest in a number of solutions that will get us out of here. Diet, most said yes. I mean, the Energy Authority, you wouldn't expect they wouldn't. And land use, much higher focus on the sort of left-hand side than the right-hand side. So that was our focus, really. We were hoping out of this to be able to say, well, actually, there's a bunch of stuff going on, and to begin to glean what are the big issues that are seen to take us forward. I'm looking at the time. No, I've yucked too much.
But this has been a real whistle-stop tour through 4 different ways we might get ourselves out of this current hole. And we've got 1 minute left. Anybody got a burning question they would like to ask, or something they want to say in less than a minute? If so, speak now.
If I could just say something, if that's all right,
Yes.
Barbara?
Yep, go on.
I just had a reply from Plymouth City Council about the pension fund. And in that book, I said by the financial journalist, she said, pension funds by default are in fossil fuel and heavy areas of investment. And we all can play our part by finding out where our pension funds are invested and seek to move into the ethical one and check it out very carefully, because they need to be looked at very carefully, because they're not always what they appear to be. But that's one of the ways we can try and push to not just divestment, but to ensure some of our pension funds is into these low carbon solutions.
That's a very good positive suggestion to end with, Alan. Thank you so much.